Last week we spoke about the incredibly important migration of all our ships to the Item 2.0 tech. Today I want to describe some of the challenges we faced. We had these seats, and the seats are pretty nifty. They allow you to enter, exit, and do some basic things, but they're only for vehicles. They're part of the vehicle logic. So one of the stepping stones before we got to 2.0 was to turn that seat into more of a generic system. It was kind of like the in-between the vehicle and then the 2.0 system. And what that allowed us to do was to separate these seats into individual items to do, your enter, exit. So we started porting stuff over to that system, and we came across some problems that the original system solved, but the new system didn't. Say we have a single-seater fighter, and we need to open up the canopy and then the ladder, and then you walk up and you enter it. Now with the original vehicle seats, you could do that. There's these things called post-actions and I think pre-actions. Basically, we play an animation to open those gateways, and then the player can enter the entrance and then everything can close. Problem is with that 1.0, the new seats, is you couldn't actually talk to the vehicle to play those things, but you could play an animation on itself. So these 1.0 seats were mostly used for things like the multi-crew ships, where you didn't have to play those animations on the ship. You just needed to play it on the seats. So you needed, like the Retaliator has this dashboard, so you interact with it and do stuff. That was all separated out of the vehicle. But if you needed to still play those animations in the vehicle, you had to go back to the vehicle seats. So what that led us to do is now we have two different seats. They solve two different problems, and what we wanted to do was remove these two seats and go with the 2.0 version that solved both of these issues. What we had to come up with was we needed a seat and this thing called a seat dashboard, and then the seat access. The seat is only responsible for just plopping the player down and giving him control. The seat by itself doesn't do anything. Then you have the dashboard. This is basically that infrastructure you see in front of you that shows the UI, shows this, shows the joysticks. Then you have the seat access, which dictated how you got into that seat. Now we could do all that, which is fine. However, we needed to break, as you can see, we now have three different items, where those other original things just had, like the vehicle seat just had it just on the ship. So now we have to break out all of these assets and put them into different items. We have to break out all of the animations into these different states. Yes, the system allows us to do a lot more. It allows us to do things that some of the animation team want to do, but because of the way the old vehicle seats and item seats were designed, we had to go back and revisit how we did those, change the art, change the whole process, take our animations, cut them up in different ways just to get them onto the 2.0 infrastructure. So it's like the stuff we wanted to do way back then, we couldn't do, so we kind of had to do some fakeroo. But because of that fakeroo, we had to go back, cut them up to how we actually wanted to do it finally, after, this is stuff we've been talking about with animation design for a long time. And it's just an extra step we have to do to move everything over. That's one of the reasons why it's taking a little bit. We actually have a big master plan of moving all the ships over, and it's like, all right, before we can move this guy over, we have to cut that animation up from here to here to here, move this here, move this here. Okay, does it work? And so we're doing that ship by ship by ship. And of course, a lot of our ships are very special snowflakes. They'll do something a little bit different here. So we have to, since we have a defined plan of how this new setup is going to work, we just have to figure out how that's going to get cut up correctly so that it works with the new infrastructure. One of the precautions we're now taking with all the new ships is learning the problems of what we did in the past, of what this ship is doing wrong or different that's causing havoc. A very beautiful ship that's causing us some fun is the Gladiator. You have two seats on the top, and then you have a bomb bay door on the bottom, and you have this line that has to come down to allow either one of them. The original thing wanted both the seats to come down. So if I'm piloting the ship and my co-pilot wanted to get out, I have to come out with him. Luckily, we were able to split that up so that a pipe comes down, then either one could come, but you still have the problem of that bomb bay door, because that's part of the landing system and the seat system, which is two different seats connections that don't know about each other. And the old system didn't really handle that too well. But now on the 2.0, we're going, okay, you can't leave until that bomb bay is open. So we're gonna open that first, then you could come down, then the seats could go back up. So we have like systems in place, but ships are special cupcakes, and we're just gonna make sure that they work on this new flow. When we're splitting up the ship from moving the vehicle from being the seat to this kind of sub-hybrid thing called the 1.0 seats, we had this thing called a seat host. And the seat host was basically trying to remove that bit of logic of seat from the ship to a generic thing. And it was like a very beginning sort of structure. It was kind of a weird mixture of things. The idea for that thing was so that vehicle, turret, generic stuff could use this, have seats. But because of that, a lot of things started using this thing called iSeat host. So you had things in the player code checking to see if you're attached to an iSeat host. You had things in UI checking to see if you're an iSeat host. So you had a lot of these embedded things checking for this thing called an iSeat host, which was horrible, but it was the only way to get stuff going until we separated these things into components. We now have to take those things that relied on the seat host and make them more into a more generic thing. One of the biggest challenges is going to be, of course, the UI. Things like the visor relied heavily on these seat host things to pull events, to pull information out of, these events would get dispatched when, I have my ship again, this guy starts firing, this guy's UI will listen to it, and it has to go, oh, I'm not the guy shooting, so I'm gonna ignore this block. But not everywhere did that. So you have the UI listening to all these crazy events, and it had to rely on this thing called a seat host. But if the seat host disappeared and didn't unregister, you'd crash and all sorts of problems. We've came up with this new infrastructure for the UI, for the seats, where they relied on more of the item component themselves rather than the seat level. And what this allowed us to do was worry about just the item. So you would have a UI for power, it just relied on knowing about the power plant. It didn't care about the vehicle, it didn't care about the player or what it was attached to. And the beauty of that is I could technically slap this onto a big Benny machine that has a power plant and you could see its power coming. But that was the dream. And separating that UI bits and pieces is one of the biggest overhauls we had to do, not just for UI, but in all the other sections of the code. And we're still dealing with it because we're at a point where we have to maintain both the item 1.0 and the item 2.0 until we could fully flip the switch saying 1.0 is not supported. So you have some UI with that seat host, some UI with just the power, and it's kind of that weird thing you're trying to deal with to not break the old until everything could get switched over to the new system. One of the other big architectural changes we've been working on is going back to the vehicle. If we had items on here, we had this thing called an event system that sent an event to the vehicle and that would dispatch it to everybody else. But since we want to get away with that event system, for one, everyone knows about it, and two, it was immediate and it was on the main thread. So what that meant is if I sent an event and I sent it to everybody, the main thread basically has to wait until everyone got it, they all did their update, and then everything happened instantaneous. So if radar picked up some enemy and he sent an event saying this thing was added, the UI would get it. We have to create all these resources just to display. A lot of things would happen when one event gets dispatched. So one of the things that we changed is instead of having this immediate called event system, we have this thing called a multi-threaded event system. And instead of everybody connecting to the vehicle's event system, they have their own and they can link to each other. So now if the UI wanted to know about radars getting, stuff appearing on the radar, it could listen to this thing called the radar data bank. And the radar data bank, when it picked up something from the radar would send an event to the data bank. The data bank wouldn't process it right then and there. It would process it in that batch update that I was talking about during its own time, pull the events out, do its thing, and handle that big load onto that thread. And then when it would do something, it would then dispatch events to other systems, and they would do the same very thing. So we've just offloaded this heavy system into batches. And it also allows us to guarantee that when this guy sent the event, the other guy would pull it down when he was ready and not immediately occurring. And with that nice event system, we could actually do some nifty things where we could actually localize those events. So before, as I was saying, we have we separated the person who controls stuff from the actor to this thing called an item user. The item user has these main events, we call them input events, and he has an input and an output event system. He could get inputs from all sorts of things, and he could send off outputs. So if I press a button, he might go, oh, I need to turn on lights. He'll translate that to an out event system. He will dispatch to all the items they control, but they'll only pull it down when they're ready to. So the player hits a button, and maybe switch on light. The switch on light gets sent to an event. It finds the controllers that he controls, figures out, oh, this guy needs to have it. Cue this event. That light controller will pull the event down in its batch update. Go, okay, I need to turn on lights. So I'm gonna go through all my lights, send them an event saying, hey, go turn on. They'll go in their batch update and go, oh, I should be on or off. I'm gonna turn on, off, on, whatever button you hit. So now we've moved this thing that was a global thing on the vehicle. So I send an event here and everyone gets it, to a more localized system that all gets utilizing that batch update and the whole big infrastructure of our controllers and items. This other thing that we have with this Item 2.0 infrastructure, with their old system, with their vehicle, when I sat down in the seat, I would get control of weapons, items, and all that stuff, and each thing would kind of handle their own set of logic. I'm hitting the fire button to shoot, and then it would do its thing and shoot. We wanted to separate that into a much more coherent structure. So after talking with design, we came up this new concept where you have the control manager, which is the ship, and then you have the user, and then the user connects to the control manager, and he controls these things called literally controllers. So you'd have a power controller, a light controller, a door controller. Basically, these are the things that have control of sub-items. So the controllers handle the input, and then they sell things to the items. An easy one, a power controller. So this power controller might have control of sub-power plants. It will talk to UI saying, here's all the power plants that you have. What do you want to do with them? So if I hit UI or maybe a button to throttle, it'll send an event to the controller. The controller will go, yes, you could do that. No, you can't do that. And it will then tell the items to do something. So now we have these sub-items that are really kind of dummy, that handles very specific logic. Like power plant just needs to provide X amount of power. And then you have the energy controller that basically input from UI and input from the user, and it translates what you want to do to those sub-items. So we have these very specific things that handle I guess you'd call it the control hierarchy.
As Ash said in last week's episode, although it's a lot of work to implement this tech, it is a game changer in every sense of the word. Item 2.0 touches every facet of the game and will ultimately create a much more immersive interactive experience. Thanks for watching. Seacrest out.